A big thank you to all my patrons who support the Engineered Mind podcast. Hi and welcome to the Engineered Mind podcast. In this podcast we cover topics such as engineering, artificial intelligence, neuroscience and other interesting topics to educate, inspire and engineer people's minds all around the world. I'm your host Jousef, and for this episode of the podcast I'm very happy to welcome David Movitz to my show. David is a mechanical engineer with a passion for leadership, problem solving and teamwork. While studying at the University of Iowa, he founded the Iowa Formula Racing Team, a student organization that designs, manufactures and races an electric Formula race car for international competitions. As team principal, he grew the team to over 50 members and led them to compete within their first year, an accomplishment few teams have achieved. David currently works for a 3D printing manufacturer, Impossible Objects, as an application engineer. He works with companies to create stronger and lighter parts made from carbon composite materials using a patented 3D printing process. While focused on 3D printing today, David studies new technological innovations with the intention of creating his own startup in the future. In this exciting podcast, David and I talked about the organization of a Formula student team, time, resource and stress management, how to select team members, how fast you should grow a team, starting a team from scratch, and the important topic of acquiring sponsors, and much more. For updates on upcoming podcasts, projects and videos, make sure to follow me on Twitter as well as on Instagram. To join my weekly newsletter, engineeredmind.sh, where I share exclusive content, visit jousef.substack.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's my podcast with David Movitz. So, David, welcome to my podcast. I'm very happy to have you on the show. What we'll start with is, as always, that you give us like a quick bio of yourself, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me on, Jousef. So my name is David Movitz. I'm 22 years old from the north suburbs of Chicago in Illinois in the United States. And I've always really wanted to be an engineer, not to sound tacky, but it did really start with Legos, just wanting to try and build stuff together. From there, I adopted a lot of hobbies. I started to do remote control helicopters and planes, really started to get my hands around tinkering a lot, then evolved into a little bit more complicated stuff with programming and some electronics. Then when I went to school at the University of Iowa, I studied mechanical engineering. And while I was there, I really got into cars. And of course, I was able to do research at the National Advanced Driving Simulator, where I studied autonomous vehicles and their effect on society. And I think most notably, I was able to make the Iowa Formula Racing Team, which is a student organization that designs, manufactures, and races an electric car for Formula FSAE competition.
That's so cool. So you're basically the perfect person to talk about Formula student teams and also give some beginners or maybe even people who are already in a Formula student team some kind of guidelines, I would say. So what we will start with is, can you maybe talk about how important is teamwork and how important is it to have a proper team structure?
Absolutely. Well, first off, in Formula FSAE, teamwork is everything. It's not possible for one person to be able to build the car. It is possible for a small team of people to build the car and race it, but not for one person. So being able to work together is definitely very critical. So you definitely want to make sure that you start with a good team structure and breaking down your goal of what you're trying to do, which ultimately is build a car to then bring and compete at competition. So making sure that you have a team structure, dividing that up in really the best way that you see it. A lot of teams do it by subsystem. So they'll go into, say, for example, chassis, drivetrain, electronics being split up into the accumulator, low voltage, and making sure that you have people looking over all these different subsystems. And then once your team grows, making sure that you have people to look over all the other little details that make up those subsystems and are able to make even the smallest decisions to make sure that the car gets done.
Got it. For me personally, there is a huge difference between a leader and a boss. How do you see leadership being involved in this kind of Formula student teams?
That's an excellent question. I think there's definitely a difference between being a leader and a boss. A leader is definitely someone who is with the team, working with them, doesn't shy away from hard work, and is right down there problem solving with everybody else on the team. I think a boss would be someone that just kind of tells people what to do, and that just doesn't work in Formula FSAE. If you're going to be the leader of a team, You really need to be involved with the team, know what's going on. And also, it's a really good time to be friends with everybody and make lifelong connections. So to be able to be down there with everybody, even in the shop, even if you're not needed to be in a certain meeting, it's really important to be down there, connect with everybody, because it will help the team grow, it will help you grow, and ultimately you'll be able to get to your goal a lot better.
Mm-hmm. How do you see communication as part of being a leader, or just for the team in general? How should communication be?
Yeah, communication is huge in Formula SAE, and I think it's really big because a lot of students don't come in with the background on communication at all. So it's really important that students learn how to effectively communicate so that they can get the car done on time. So making sure that if you have new members, you know how they're going to communicate with the rest of the team. Do they have to sign up for an email list? Are you using a special communication channel like Slack? Making sure that new members know how to communicate with team members that are already on the team. But then you also want to make sure that you're communicating a lot of the other parts of the team, such as what tasks there are to do. Are you using a project management software like Asana, Monday.com, Microsoft Projects? That's also a really good way to communicate a lot of the project management side of Formula SAE. And you also want to make sure that you're communicating about teamwork as well. Is everybody working together well? Are parts getting done on time? Are you communicating with suppliers and sponsors enough? And ultimately, the more communication you do, the easier things will go. It kind of sounds crazy, but it is better to over-communicate and kind of hear the same thing a few times than to not hear something and realize that you missed out on an opportunity or you're falling behind.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree on that. How was it for you time management wise? Because you build it basically from scratch with other peers. How do you manage your time, or how would you suggest others managing their time besides studying and so on, and also having a private life, of course?
Yeah, time management is really, really big in Formula SAE. A lot of students typically that are really dedicated will typically put around 40 hours a week into the Formula team, which does sound like a lot, and especially if you're handling a part-time job on top of schooling, you're definitely going to have busy weeks. For me, I really wanted to do Formula SAE. It was my number one goal. It was in the forefront of my mind literally all the time. So I kind of made that a really top priority, but I still had to make sure that I was working on school. So I would always sit down in the beginning of the week and just think through what I had to do for the week, what schoolwork I needed to do, what the Formula team needed, and then just kind of go from there and figure out where I need to be able to spend my time and where I can even, talk with friends or hang out with them. And it does work out in the end. I know it totally gets like overwhelming and just crazy at times, and you think, oh my God, this is just never going to stop. But it definitely does. And as long as you just keep pushing forward, you're efficient with your time management, and you're also good at planning out your weeks and what you do, you'll be able to make it work. I know for myself, I definitely spent a lot more time on Formula than probably anything else in my schooling career, but that was okay because that's what I wanted to do. And ultimately, I was able to learn a lot more because of it, and I was able to get a lot greater connections through spending so much time in it.
Mm-hmm. That's so great to hear. I mean, if you're passionate about it, it's kind of natural that you do spend the hours, like you're willing to spend the additional hours anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then when you get a team that everybody else wants to do the same thing, then you've got a perfect team and you just be able to grind away and get a car done.
Yeah, that's so cool. Closely related to time management is also stress management. What would you recommend for people dealing a lot with stress?
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. Maybe feeling overwhelmed with the amount of work they have, university plus the work on the Formula student team.
Definitely. Well, if someone out there is feeling stressed about what's going on, trying to manage everything, let me be someone to tell you that it is okay. It will be okay. You don't have to get totally overworked. Formula SAE is not something that you should be ridiculously overworking yourself to the point where you just really can't do anything anymore. It's not somewhere where you have to put every single bit of your energy, because if you don't, it could be the end of the world. It's not. It's a learning experience. So it's fine to have that stress. And I think in the end of the day, that helps a little bit to motivate you to get your work done and make sure that you're not letting the team fail. but it's also important for you to manage yourself and make sure that you're getting enough sleep, you're getting your work done, and you ultimately have control over your life. Because we've had situations where if you don't have control of what's going on in your own personal life, it can definitely start to have an effect on other people, which is just negative overall. So it may be stressful, and that's fine, but don't take it extremely seriously, and it will be okay.
That's good input from you, David. Thanks, Adon. When it comes to team recruitment, how would you choose your team members? Is it more that you choose them by passion over like having good grades? I don't know if you do that, like judging people by grades, but how do you approach this kind of problem?
So our team specifically, the Iowa Formula Racing team, our standard is you can join the team with absolutely no knowledge at all. You don't have to have ever picked up a wrench or a screwdriver in your life. You don't ever have to have designed anything, because we will be able to teach you all those skills. So we don't have any prejudgments or requirements coming onto the team. All we want to know is that you're dedicated, you want to do this, and you're going to come with high energy and be willing to learn. That's really the most important part for our team, and what I would highly suggest other Formula teams to look out for new members as well. I think that you'll be a lot more successful if you look more at, does this person really care, and do they have a lot of energy and excitement about the project, rather than looking at, are their grades perfect, or do they have actual experience that we don't have to teach them as much? Because Formula SAE is all about the learning. Mm-hmm. Recruitment is huge for Formula teams because it's very different than the real world. In a company, you get to hire people, you have management that usually sticks around for a long time and so on. For a Formula SAE team, students are usually only in school and on the team for 4 years. So there's a lot of shift in positions and who's on the team, and usually the size on the team can vary because of that. So definitely really important to be recruiting constantly. I think that in the beginning of the school year or in the beginning of the semester is usually where you'll get most of your recruitment, usually because that's where a lot of students are looking for something new to do. They have a resolution, they want to get more involved. That's definitely where you're going to get a lot of new members. But in order to get those new members, you have to be prepared. For me on the team, like my biggest fear was having someone new try and join the team and then not have them be able to do anything. Because that's someone that has shown interest, they've shown up to a workshop or a meeting, and they want to be involved, but the team isn't ready for them to be involved, and we can't really get them involved. That's pretty much a waste of everybody's time at that point. So really not good. So what we tried to do is make sure that we were always prepared to take on new people. And sometimes that did mean taking sacrifices of, during recruitment week, stopping all progress on the car and making sure that we had new projects that people with literally no experience could work on, training sessions lined up to make sure that we could teach people critical skills, even simple meetings that just went over the basics of the team and get people started, and also making sure that people got into a subsystem or started working on something that they wanted to learn more about and wanted to learn more about and wanted to start working on. So definitely making sure that the team was ready to recruit is really big. And I think we saw, I think we had pretty good success in this past year with recruitment. I think because of the pandemic, things kind of got shifted. But in the beginning of the school year, in the fall of 2019, we had a really huge effort to try and recruit as many people as possible because our team was kind of small. A lot of senior members would be graduating, and we needed new members to take on the new positions for next year. So we had a huge team effort of recruiting, and we knew we would be willing to make these sacrifices to pause progress on the car so that we could get more people. And we ended up getting like 110 people interested in the team, and I emphasize interested. So 110 people signed up for our email, and then we had a bunch show up to our meetings. Ultimately, we got around, I want to say 25, maybe 30 members from the beginning of that semester. Now, mind you, at that time, we were really only around 20 actual people working on the car, working on the team. So to all of a sudden get 30 people that wanted to do something on the car is extremely overwhelming and crazy to think about. And it's like, wow, are we ready to do this? And I think we were in definitely a good spot. We had training sessions together to teach new members how to do things. We started from the basics. We had separate meetings for new members to make sure that we could get them up to speed with what was going on. made sure that they were on all of our communication and file storage channels, and just making sure that they felt a part of the team, that they could contribute, and make sure that they know that even though they may know nothing right now, they will be able to contribute and be a valuable member to the team. And I think that's definitely something that's really important for recruitment in general, is making sure that you let other people know that they can actually be very valuable to the team, but they will also be able to learn a lot of important life skills a part of a Formula FSAE team. So definitely being prepared to recruit members is going to be a huge part of recruitment in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about recruitment itself. Like, how do you see that? Should someone scale a team very quickly with a lot of members, or should it be like slowly and gradually increasing over time? What do you think about that?
I would say that it definitely has to depend on the team. If your team is like 100 people and you're making a second car to compete in a second competition, maybe you do want to scale with a lot of people so that you can have the new people working on the new car, or have them kind of spread out between your current car and your new car. But also, if you're, say, 10 people and all of a sudden you have 50 people join, it might be an extreme challenge to then try and get all these new people acquainted and delegate all the work. So I don't think that there's like a one answer for how to grow a team, but I think you definitely have to assess the team first and figure out, are we able to delegate this work to new members? Are we able to teach these new skills so that people can actually contribute and be valuable to the team? And if you can answer those questions in a positive manner, for instance, you've got a bunch of CAD parts that you can teach how to make in SolidWorks and Creo. You've got someone who's really knowledgeable in simulation software, and they can teach a bunch of classes in a week. If you do have those resources available to you and you can teach those skills, then I think you definitely are able to increase the size of your team and increase your membership. If you're, for example, if you don't have those capabilities, if you're not able to do a lot of classes, if you're not really sure what you would give a new person what to do, that's also okay, but that may be a sign that you want to look into the team and see if there's other ways that you could get more people involved, because the more people you have, the easier time you will have to delegate more work, spread things out, and I think it will ultimately then be easier on yourself, because then you'll be able to spread the work out and you won't have as much of a workload.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. How did you get started? Maybe just take a step back and have a look at the beginnings where you started the team. How did you think about it? How did you approach it? Was it like, okay, where do I start? Do I first pick up a list and say, okay, we need this, this, this? Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight there, because it's super interesting, I think, for people who don't have any team at all at their universities and want to make something.
Yeah. That's like the $1 million question, is like, how do you start this? How do you get it all together? If you're in this position and you're watching this, you're probably the one person who has this idea right now at the university, which is great. You've started with the first step. You've got this idea and you want to take action. You want to make it happen. That's awesome. I commend you for that. That's fantastic. That's kind of the same position that I was in when I first started. And there's a lot of different ways that you can start off the team. What I did was I just did a bunch of Googling and research, trying to figure out what's already out there. You know, is there like one list of things that I do need to do? And so just trying to figure out what needs to be done in order to make a formula team, like what do we need to do? And so ultimately I was able to find a bunch of online forums. Believe it or not, this isn't the first time that the question has been asked. So if you go on the FSAE subreddit, there's FSAE forums. There's a ton of resources out there on how to manage a team, start a team, and build up the resources that you need. For me, I started out with telling a few of my friends, just seeing like, hey, you know, what do you think of this? You know, I'd like to start this team here. And they thought it was cool. So then we just kind of started to work on it a little bit more casually. One of the big things that I did is I actually reached out to someone else who already started their own formula team at their university. They were a huge help in the beginning because they were able to answer all the questions that I had no idea I needed answers to. So being able to reach out to someone who has experience, even if it's a current formula team, they will be able to guide you in the right direction to make sure that you are successful. And the Formula FSAE community is extremely, extremely helpful. very open. People love to share information and ideas. And I really found that when I myself went to a competition in 2017 and 2018, if you go to a Formula SAE competition, you'll find that everybody there is happy to talk to you, give you ideas and tips, walk you through maybe sometimes how to design something or things to look at. Even sponsors as well, they'll be able to help you, guide you in the right direction there. So for me, I then talked with all those teams, gained a lot more information. Then we kind of hit a roadblock. We needed to make terms with the university to get the team approved. And that's another really big thing, is you want to make sure that the university is on your side and that you can work with them in a positive relationship. If the university is not really on board, that's fine. They were totally not on board with the idea when I first pitched it. When I first pitched the idea of a formula team, the university said, yeah, this guy's crazy. He needs $80,000 to build a race car. He'll just go away eventually. But the key was being persistent and polite and professional, and making sure that I was conveying my energy, my positivity towards the project, and making sure that they knew that I knew and I believed fully that it could be done. Ultimately, they saw that energy. They were able to approve it. And from there, we started meeting right away. We told as many people as possible, tried to get our team running as quickly as possible, started designing, and before we knew it, we were at competition for 2019.
That's so cool. Thanks a lot, David, for this insight. I think that gave some people out there like a big motivational boost right now, listening to this podcast.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, if you're thinking of starting a Formula team, do it. It's going to be one of the best experiences that you could ever ask for. No class out there will be able to teach you all the things that you will learn starting, let alone being a part of a Formula team.
Yeah, absolutely. You also talked about sponsors. How did you acquire sponsorships? How did you approach that?
Yeah, that's another really good question. It's like the golden question of Formula SAE, because everybody's got a budget and everybody's got different numbers, and it's kind of like, what is the one answer? If you're looking for numbers and you're just trying to figure out what's a good goal, I can give you numbers. So if you're a new team, you probably should try and get around $30,000 in cash and $30,000 of in-kind sponsorships. If you're a team that's already been working, maybe you want to try and get $35,000 in cash and $50,000 in in-kind donations. Some people are going to hear those numbers and think they're ridiculously low. Some are going to hear them and think they're ridiculously high. If you're starting out, it could be a good goal to reach for, especially if you really don't know what parts and services that you'll need to get in the future. The best way to go about sponsorship is to figure out what you need. Think about this. If you're in the situation where, okay, we're trying to build this race car and we need steel. Okay, I found 5 different steel companies on the internet. I'm going to call one of them right now. And you call one of them and they say, yeah, okay, I'd love to help you. What do you guys need? And you don't know what you need. That's a huge problem, because there's no way you're going to be able to guess the right number of steel that you need, because you probably don't know what you need the steel for to design for. So it really does come down to what the team needs and being able to fulfill those needs. So are you trying to get new components? Are you trying to get a sponsor to machine a part? Which, talking with machine companies is a completely different story, because it's a lot more in-depth conversation. Making sure that you're able to communicate what you need and that the team knows through sponsorship what they need to get is extremely critical. Otherwise, you're going to have a really hard time. Now, it is possible to work with companies without knowing exactly what you need if you kind of give them an idea, but it's really hard to guess. And ultimately, it'll be a lot harder for the sponsor to come through and support you guys, because they won't know exactly what to do. And ultimately, they're probably giving you something for free or at a very large discount. So it's in your best interest to also make it easier on them too. So being specific with what you need is definitely going to be something that you need to work on for sponsorship.
Oh, that's so cool, David. So many tips right now. It's maybe, so for some it's maybe overwhelming, but these tips are super valuable. And thank you so much for that. Now, when it comes to building the car, like manufacturing, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks in manufacturing a car, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so in our first year, it was crazy, because no one had really had manufacturing experience to this level before. Our team, there was people who had done welding, they'd tinkered around with motorbikes or whatever, but manufacturing an actual car to the design that you need to and to the rules to make it safe and run is a completely different challenge. And frankly, I think that manufacturing is, I believe, the hardest part to Formula FSAE, because any team can go out there, get the CAD software, design their hearts out, and make something incredible. But at the end of the day, you still need to build that and bring it to competition. So your ability on what you can design really reflects on what you're able to actually manufacture. And that can come from many different areas. So you can try and get things machined from a company if you want to make something CNC machine, or you can look at, does the university have a machine shop that we can also utilize? Also trying to figure out how to get parts. So trying to figure out where do we need to get certain parts from? How are we going to get these parts? Yeah, and really making sure that the team knows what their manufacturing capabilities are really important, because if you design something that you can't make, then you won't be able to put it on the car. So, for example, if you're a first-year team, you're most likely going to want to build a space frame out of steel tubing. It's very unrealistic for a year that has no experience building a car, let alone trying to make a fancy frame out of carbon fiber. It just doesn't really make sense, and it takes a lot more effort. And ultimately, you're going to learn a lot more from using simpler materials and simpler manufacturing methods. I think one of the easiest and best ways to try and get a lot of parts done is get them water jet. It's usually very readily available in a lot of different areas, and it's also very cheap as well. So companies will usually be willing to give you time on a water jet. Sometimes they'll even give you material for your parts as well. It does take some extra design to make sure that all of your parts can be made out of these 2D forms and then put together. But ultimately, I think it's a much simpler manufacturing method than trying to make some complex part that needs to be 5-axis CNC machined, and it just is really hard to make and doesn't really add that much more value. And also making sure that the people on your team know how to put stuff together. When we were first going through the build process, our team wasn't very knowledgeable about the build process at all. So we were really learning as we went through and trying to figure out what machines we should use for what kind of tools we needed. Tools is a huge part. Do you have the right tools to be able to put stuff together? Slight side note, higher quality tools are a worthy investment. And making sure that the team knows how to use those tools is going to be really important as well. So making sure that for us, we were going through and documenting what problems we came across and how we were able to figure them out was really critical, because then for the next year, for this current year, we were then able to say, okay, it's going to take this long to put this together. We're going to need these parts to do this, and as well as this weld table and these filaments and what have you, to be able to put a certain system together. Whereas when you're first starting out, you really don't know what you don't know. So it's important to just go through the manufacturing process how you think you should, learn from your mistakes, and then be able to fix them going forward.
Mm-hmm. So over the building process, let's say you start with a prototype and then build or move towards the competition. How often do you actually meet? Is it like a meeting with everybody, or is it like team-wise meeting? How do you approach that kind of subject?
Yeah, meetings are extremely critical because it relates directly to communication. And if you're not communicating well, then you're not going to be able to build your car. So for our team, in the very beginning, we met every Monday as an entire team, and then every Saturday. And then throughout the week, we'd sometimes meet as well to do some work in the shop. That was extremely ineffective for our team because we would constantly have these times where we would have 30 people in a room, and we would be going over stuff for the team. And most of the time, what we were going over was only applicable to like 4 people in the room. And I think the worst part was when we were in a meeting and I don't really know what was going on, but all of a sudden I realized that there was a discussion about like the electronics, and it was really only relatable to like 4 out of the 35 people that were in the room. So really ineffective way of being able to communicate, because it ultimately was wasting everybody's time. Now, the way that I have broken it down is that in order to have an effective meeting, you have to have ideas, you want to come together, you want to discuss those ideas, but most importantly, leaving a meeting, you want to make sure that you have a plan going forward. If you don't have a plan going forward in a meeting, then you didn't really discuss any ideas or figure anything out. It shows that you've learned something and you need to do something going forward, and that what you discussed was valuable to the project. Mm-hmm. So last year's meeting schedule of what we did just wasn't really that effective. And we recognized that as a team entirely. So we totally overhauled what we did and how we conducted our meetings. The first thing we did is we split up our regular whole team meeting into bi-weekly meetings. So every other week, the whole team would get together and we would only discuss topics that directly related and affected the entire team. They were usually very short, only went over very critical things, of course, that affected the entire team. And we made sure not to waste people's time. And we also always did them in the shop. And because they were so short, people were usually standing, and right after the meeting, they would be able to do work because they were right there in the shop. The next thing we did is we split up our subsystems to have meetings throughout the week. But what we did was we made sure that in the beginning of the year, the team lead went through their entire subsystem and said, okay, we're going to meet at this time every week and work on this, usually in the same spot. Depends on where you are in the build season. And every single week, that subsystem would meet at that same spot, at that same time, and have a work time, be able to just do whatever they needed to. Maybe they needed to discuss something and so on. The next thing that we did to really focus on the team was have a leads meeting on every Friday at 4:30, same place, same time, every week. And that was a meeting strictly to discuss team operations. We really wanted to focus on were people working together, was the project coming together, what is something that we can do to make sure that people are working together better. And we always looked at how's the team performing, how are we as leads performing, are we going in the right direction? We always, well, I shouldn't say always, we left out car discussions most of the time. There were some parts or some points we needed to talk about certain parts or big decisions, but we've strictly focused on the team. And that was really important because we were then able to take time out of the day, out of the week, to figure out, is what we're doing actually adding value to the project and getting us towards our goal? That was extremely important. Then over the weekend, usually on Saturdays, the whole team would meet in the shop and be able to do work however they needed to do it. And for me as a leader, I wasn't necessarily a part of any specific subsystem. I had a big hand in sponsorship, so I did lead a lot of those meetings, but I wasn't necessarily required to go to any of these meetings in particular. But I still attended a huge majority of those meetings, even though I wasn't there. And I did that because I wanted to see with my own eyes and through my own interpretation of what every subsystem was doing in these meetings to make sure they were effective in getting us towards our goal. Because usually there's sometimes a breakdown in communication and loss in interpretation of, what someone sees as progress and what someone doesn't see as progress. If someone tells me they made progress on a subsystem, I don't really know what that means. If there's like a quantitative number to that, like, yeah, we ran like 7 simulations, like, okay, that could be progress, but were those simulations needed? Mm-hmm. So I always made sure to go through to all the meetings that I could and make sure that everybody was working together and that the team was getting closer to our goal and that meetings were effective and not wasting people's time.
Mm-hmm. It's good that you mentioned goals. How do you define the goals / milestones? How was it for you? Is it team-wise? Of course, the end goal is like participate in the competition and then, of course, be successful. But how do you have these kind of milestones defined?
Yeah, goals are extremely important. If you don't have a goal of what you're doing for the entire team, then you're going to really struggle because you won't really know what you're doing and why you're doing it. I like to think of it as goals are like the reasoning behind reasoning. So making sure that you have that one ultimate goal for the team. What are you trying to do? Are we trying to win acceleration? Are we trying to win the entire competition? Are we just trying to make a car that runs and passes tech? Whatever that may be, you want to make sure that you identify that and that the whole team knows about it so that everybody can work for and add value to that goal. Mm-hmm. If you don't identify that, you're going to start to do a lot of things that just don't really add up and get you to that goal. For example, a lot of Formula teams will do aerodynamics and all of that really fancy stuff because it's cool, it's sexy, it's got carbon fiber in it, fiberglass, all these really neat things. But for a beginning team, having the goal of trying to make a aerodynamic system isn't actually useful because in the beginning, you're really trying to get a car that runs and works. And having aerodynamics does not make the car run better. It just is an extra thing that adds performance. And so when you're really trying to get something that just runs and works together to prove the point that your team is able to make something and then develop it further, it doesn't really add much value to add aerodynamics. So that's really important. But you also want to make sure that you're keeping track of your progress towards the goal. So every meeting that we had that was together, I always put at the very top of our meeting outline what our goal was. So for us, it was build a Formula SAE car that will compete in FSAE California in June 2019. Excuse me. It was more specific than that. It was build an electric Formula SAE car that will pass tech inspection at Formula SAE California in June 2019. Trying to be as specific and exact as possible so that there was no ifs, ands, or buts of if we met it. Like, we tried to make it as binary as possible so that we knew if we were meeting that goal and what we needed to do to meet that goal as well. So every meeting, everyone was reminded of that goal, and then making sure that we just kind of look back at what we were doing every week or so and making sure that we were getting ourselves closer. Did the chassis team do enough work or focus enough on what they needed to get it working right? Was the drivetrain developed in the right way? Were parts ordered in time so that we could get certain parts in? Was the team meeting enough, or were there too many midterms and people got too lost in the week? So making sure that we were going back on our goals and analyzing if we were actually reaching them and working to attain our goals.
One of the last things I want to discuss is design. How is design related to the manufacturing process? How did you make decisions in that sense?
Yeah, and so like I said with manufacturing, I think that's really what drives your design, because if you don't have the capabilities to make these really fancy parts or get these really fancy pre-made parts, then you're not going to be able to really design for that. So, and that really kind of does tie into sponsorship. You know, do you have this machine shop that's willing to make these fancy parts for you? Do you have the supplier that's going to give you this new wire? Or do you have someone who's going to give you enough cash to then make those parts? So for design, you really do have to look at what your manufacturing capabilities are. And you really want to make sure that when you are designing, everybody is communicating. Like I said, I think a bunch of times already, communication is extremely important, because if, let's say, the chassis team is designing their frame, but we also have some low voltage group working on a PCB. Well, let's say that they don't communicate and we're starting to build, and all of a sudden we have this low voltage PCB that needs to go into the frame. Well, they never talked about it and they never communicated about it in the design phase. So now we're in the manufacturing phase and we can't even put it together. So a lot of communication early on is going to save a lot of pain later on in the manufacturing phase. I think there's a lot of common knowledge in Formula SAE that it is worth taking that extra time to design all of those little parts and even add those nuts and bolts and wires, because it will save you weeks on end in the manufacturing phase. And it also just helps you too, because not only are you going to learn how to design better, just being able to learn the CAD programs is going to be extremely valuable for yourself and for the team. And then the CAD assembly that you make kind of turns out to be an instruction manual for what you're trying to build. So you'll definitely have something later to look at afterwards your design to make sure that you're building it correctly.
Thanks a lot, David, for that super cool and very valuable input. To wrap things up, can you talk about the things we talked about them in like during the podcast or while we were discussing things, but maybe to wrap things up, maybe things FSAE teams do wrong to have a cool and maybe very valuable ending for the people out there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things, and I think this is definitely very opinion based. I think some of the things that I see teams do wrong that I already mentioned is they bite off more than they can chew. They try and over-design stuff. So I think I've seen a few examples of teams trying to go for a four-wheel drive electric car, even though they've barely proven that they can make a single electric motor rear-wheel drive car or even an electric car at all. They just want to totally leap for this ridiculously huge goal, which is good to have ambitious goals, but you have to make sure that they're also realistic and achievable. So that's something that I think some Formula teams have also struggled with. Something else that I think a lot of teams struggle with is making sure that you have an A team to build an A car. If your team isn't working great, if you're not communicating fantastically, you're probably not going to end up designing and making a really good car to then bring to competition. So making sure that you have that A team to then build that A car, I think that's pretty common knowledge in a lot of the Formula community. That's also going to be really important for making a successful car. And I think one of the other things, I think you definitely have to think creatively. I think some teams get a little too caught up or sometimes maybe overwhelmed with the idea of trying to design a whole thing from the ground up, a whole system. But that's really what Formula SAE is. It's that opportunity to think creatively, let your own ideas come through, and make something that you thought of and bring it to real life. I think that's an incredible opportunity that you're likely not going to find anywhere else a part of college. And it's something that I think a lot of teams really should probably try and take advantage of a lot more, is that opportunity to be able to let students think creatively, work differently together, and come up with this awesome race car in the end to then show off what they've learned.
That's cool, David. That was a beautiful ending. And I would say, with that being said, thank you so much for being on my show and having it was around 40 minutes we had now, and you pushed a lot of information into this 40 minutes. So thanks a lot for that. And I think it's super valuable for beginners, but even people who are already in a Formula student team. And I think the value is super high from this podcast. Again, thank you so much, David, and hopefully see you in the future in another podcast. Let's see what the topic then will be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jousef. And I'll just throw out there, if anyone out there is looking for advice or tips, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, David Movitz, and I'll be happy to answer more questions and give more advice there. Thanks again, Jousef.
Thanks. Bye-bye.